My life shattered the day my dad, the rock of our family, was accused of something unspeakable. The accusations were horrific: assault on young girls, and the evidence, a chilling AI-generated recording, seemed irrefutable. I watched, helpless, as the community turned its back on him, and the court, swayed by this fabricated recording, delivered a guilty verdict. He was kicked out of our home, his reputation ruined, and our family torn apart. I was only 12, a tender age to witness such a brutal dismantling of everything I held dear. The silence in our house, after he left, was deafening, a constant reminder of the gaping hole he'd left behind. Then, just 6 months later, my world twisted even more violently. My mom, heartbroken and vulnerable, married Peter. Peter, the man responsible for my dad's downfall. I remember the knot in my stomach the day he moved in. His too wide smile and eyes that seemed to constantly assess, to measure. He was a counselor, and the girls he was accused of hurting were his own patients. The irony was a bitter pill I choked on daily, a constant taste of injustice in my mouth. My mom, in her grief, saw him as a savior, a kind hand reaching out in her darkest hour. But I saw a wolf in sheep's clothing, a predator who had somehow manipulated his way into our lives, into our home. I knew, deep in my gut, that my dad was innocent. He'd always been my hero, my confidant. And his quiet dignity in the face of such an injustice only solidified my belief. Before he left, he pressed a slip of paper into my hand. "This is James's number," he'd whispered, his voice hoarse with pain. "He'll believe you. He'll help you." That tiny slip of paper felt like a lifeline in a storm, a fragile thread connecting me to hope. I clutched it like a sacred relic, waiting for the right moment to use it. James turned out to be a former colleague of my dad's, a private investigator who had always admired my father's integrity. When I called him, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination, he listened patiently, his questions precise and insightful. He didn't dismiss me as a child with a wild imagination. He saw the conviction in my eyes, the desperation in my voice. He told me he'd suspected something was off with Peter from the beginning, but without concrete evidence, his concerns had been easily dismissed. That call was the first glimmer of hope in a long, dark tunnel. It was the moment I realized I wasn't alone in this fight. The next year was a blur of covert operations and whispered conversations. James taught me how to observe, how to gather information without being detected. He instructed me on how to keep a low profile, to act normal, and to trust my instincts. We started with Peter's professional life. James dug into old case files, interviewed former colleagues, and pieced together a pattern of unsettling behavior. He discovered a history of complaints against Peter that had been conveniently buried or dismissed, all tied to his alleged counseling methods. He also began investigating the specific AI software that had been used to frame my dad, convinced that it held the key to unraveling Peter's deception. I, on the other hand, had to live with him. Living with Peter was a constant tightrope walk, every interaction a calculated risk. He was charming, manipulative, and incredibly skilled at putting on a facade for my mother. He'd bring her flowers, whisper sweet nothings, and play the role of the loving stepfather with unnerving perfection. But I saw the cracks. I noticed the way his eyes lingered a moment too long on young girls when we were out, the casual, seemingly innocent touches he'd dole out that sent shivers down my spine. He had a way of making you feel indebted to him, of subtly twisting your words until you questioned your own sanity. He'd often counsel me, offering unsolicited advice that felt more like subtle interrogations trying to pry into my thoughts and feelings about my father. The terrifying realization that he was inching closer to me, his stepdaughter, was a cold dread that settled in my bones. I'd catch him watching me, a strange glint in his eyes, and I knew, with a certainty that made my heart pound, that he would make his move eventually. He started leaving his office door ajar when he was supposedly working, making sure I could hear his hushed, intense phone calls, seemingly to make me feel I was part of his world. The thought of him touching me, of him making me another victim, made me sick with fear. But it also fueled my resolve. I had to expose him, not just for my dad, but for those other girls, and for myself. I began keeping a detailed, hidden journal, documenting every suspicious glance, every unsettling comment, every fleeting moment of discomfort. We found inconsistencies in his alibis, digital footprints he thought he'd erased, and, most damningly, a pattern of Peter using AI voice manipulation software, not just for the recording that implicated my dad, but for other, less public instances where he'd escaped accountability. James had a contact in cyber forensics who was able to identify the specific software, and with incredible skill, trace it back to Peter's personal devices. The expert even managed to retrieve fragments of deleted files, whispers of Peter's true nature hidden within the digital ether. The real breakthrough came when James found other victims. Girls, a few years older than me, who had been in counseling with Peter before my dad's case. They too had been silenced, their stories dismissed, their voices drowned out by his manipulative charm and the fabricated evidence he so expertly wielded. It took months of careful, empathetic outreach from James and then from me to convince them to speak up. It was terrifying for them and for me to revisit those painful memories, but seeing their courage, feeling their shared burden, gave me strength I didn't know I had. We became a silent army, bound by a common enemy and a burning desire for justice. We met in secret, sharing our experiences, bolstering each other's courage, and meticulously compiling a dossier of Peter's crimes. Each new piece of information solidified our case, making it undeniable. After a year of relentless investigation, we had it all. Irrefutable proof of Peter's AI manipulation, corroborated testimonies from his other victims, and a detailed timeline of his predatory behavior. The day I finally sat my mom down, my heart pounding against my ribs, and laid out all the evidence, was one of the hardest of my life. I showed her the technical reports, the sworn statements from the other girls, even excerpts from my hidden journal. She cried, a deep, racking sound of betrayal and agony. It was a long, painful conversation, filled with disbelief and then finally a dawning horror. She saw the monster she had married, and the pain of that realization was almost unbearable to witness. But she listened, she believed, and that was all I needed. Her belief, her eventual outrage, fueled my own resolve even further. We filed a new case. The court proceedings were grueling. Peter, true to form, tried every trick in the book, painting us as delusional, vindictive, and attention-seeking. His lawyer tried to discredit the AI evidence, claiming it was doctored. But James had prepared for this, bringing in his cyber forensics expert, who meticulously explained the process and the undeniable evidence. Peter's defense tried to twist the girls' testimonies, suggesting they were coerced or seeking attention. But this time, we were prepared. James was a formidable ally, presenting the technical evidence with unwavering clarity. My new friends, brave and resolute, spoke their truths, their voices steady despite their pain, their stories interwoven to form an undeniable tapestry of abuse. And then there was me, I testified about living with him, about the constant fear, about his predatory gaze, and the chilling certainty that I was next. I spoke about the manipulation, the gaslighting, and the slow, insidious way he tried to control every aspect of my life. My voice, though young, was unwavering, fueled by years of silent suffering and a fierce desire for justice. Peter knew his time was up. The night before the final verdict, he made his move. I was in my room, reviewing notes, going over every detail of our case one last time, when he burst in, his face contorted with rage. His eyes, usually so calculating, were wild with desperation. He lunged at me, his grip painfully tight as he forced me into a chair and tied me with some old rope he'd seemingly prepared. "You little brat," he hissed, his voice devoid of the charming veneer he usually wore. "You think you can ruin me?" He started tearing through my room, frantically searching for the last pieces of evidence, the final proof that would seal his fate. But I had hidden them well, under the loose floorboard in my closet, wrapped in waterproof plastic. I had anticipated this, preparing for his desperate final act. My fear was real, a cold knot in my stomach, but so was my resolve. I wasn't going to let him win, not after everything we had fought for. The police arrived just as he was getting desperate, alerted by James, who had grown concerned when he couldn't reach me for our nightly check-in call. The look on Peter's face when he saw the officers was priceless, a mixture of shock, fury, and utter defeat. He was arrested on the spot, his pathetic struggle quickly subdued by the officers. The verdict came swiftly after that. Peter was found guilty on multiple counts of assault and for manipulating evidence. He was sentenced to a long time in prison, a place where his manipulations would finally be powerless. The relief that washed over me was immense, a tidal wave of freedom and vindication. My dad was exonerated, his name cleared, and he was finally, truly, home. The reunion was emotional, a flood of tears and embraces that spoke volumes more than words ever could. The experience had taken its toll. For 2 years I was homeschooled. The trauma of living with Peter, the constant fear, and the intensity of the investigation had left their mark. I needed time to heal, to process everything, to just be a kid again. My mom was incredible during that time, showering me with love and support, helping me find a therapist who specialized in trauma. She apologized countless times for her blindness, but I told her it wasn't her fault. Peter was a master manipulator. James remained a steadfast friend, a quiet presence in our lives, checking in regularly. He became a sort of honorary uncle, always ready with a kind word or a listening ear. When I finally returned to school, I was different. Stronger, more resilient, and with a keen understanding of justice and injustice. I carried the scars, but also the invaluable lesson that one person, even a child, armed with truth and supported by good people, can make a difference. And most importantly, I had my dad back, and our family, though forever changed, was whole again, forged stronger by the fires we had endured.